Very good morning to you. Everybody's happy in the studio this morning. I'm the only one who's left just talking to you. I'll call them when they come and talk to you. So, Wanjiru, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. I was computing several discussions that took place here. Interesting ones.
Very good. Before we introduce Joanne now properly, officially, City, today's language.
If the elders leave you a legacy of a dignified language, you do not abandon it and speak a childish language.
Okay.
I have problems with the elders in general, but City, not today. To Peter. Peter too.
Maybe whatever I wanted to say in Tawacha, I Peter too.
Peter too.
Since it's that moment where we just let things pass.
Leo Peter,
Tuseme status quo sometimes is
No, it is
okay.
good, auntie. Hata mimi nimesikia.
Once in a while. Jirani. Once in a while.
So, Joanne Kobuthi-Kuria is one of our good listeners. She's a policy and communications specialist. She's with us in the studio.
Yes.
Yes, Joanne.
Yeah.
So, you know everybody here apart from me.
I know.
I feel left out. I think we have a connection.
She calls in. She follows you actively. That's the relationship.
I know. That's a connection right there.
Yeah. Okay. Sawa tu.
Oh, yeah.
Ni sawa.
No, Eric, you're dampening the spirit,
the
the
next
Friday
guest.
spirit.
The next guest, John.
Must be Eric's relation.
John, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And for all the conversations that we have, even on the phone,
Yes.
when you call in. As we went to the top of the hour, we're talking about Samia Suluhu Hassan's administration, her style of government, and what has happened in Tanzania in the last couple of months, and especially this week. And you wanted to bring in the gender angle.
Yeah. We talked about gender and politics and leadership yesterday on the show. Oftentimes, when women are in positions of power, they don't truly hold that power. So she could be the president, and as Siti said, that she wasn't elected the president. She became president because the president died. And I feel like sometimes we will have a high standard of women because they hold a particular office, not knowing that the instruments of power are not in their possession. And I'm not excusing this. Unlike Tundu, who says that he had guarded optimism, I'm a perpetual pessimist when it comes to civic spaces and human rights, because I feel like, a leopard doesn't shed its spots. It's a CCM party. What were we expecting? I mean, I kind of hope that because she's a female president, she will perhaps do justice and do better. But I mean, I'm not surprised by what's happening now. What I'm just saying is I don't think all the time we see women in positions of power that they truly hold those instruments. And we must therefore interrogate who holds this power, who holds these instruments, she's the mouthpiece. She's the person that we see, but who's behind? That's the gender dynamic that I wanted to include.
So you think Magufuli is still running the country posthumously? Because the assumption here is that during Magufuli's days, it was Magufuli in charge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not Jakaya
Not the party.
Kikwete, not his predecessors. It was him in charge. It was he who came and he took over CCM and he started running CCM as his vehicle.
Yes.
And Samia Suluhu Hassan has not been able to do that yet.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different take, and this is me not fully, maybe appreciating the Tanzanian situation. It's for this action to happen so soon after her ascendancy, in the manner that it has, is sending a message to somebody. And so the question I ask is, who is this being communicated to? Also, the discussion with Tundu Lissu indicates really an opposition that has been isolated, that doesn't have this wide spread support. So it looks like a political push, to really target this particular, political leader. So I think she's showing her hand. I think she's coming out and showing her hand and saying, I can manage things.
I'm
my
in
power,
charge.
I am in charge.
Asserting her authority.
You asserting herself. Because she has 100, that window, that honeymoon period to kind of show the kind of leader she is. And then she said economy. Because economy worked for Magufuli. So I think she's showing her hand. And whether it's because she's trying to get into good books or build support from the CCM, she must have counted her political, the issues she has on her plate and seen this move will work for me in one way or the other. Because politicians always do moves.
I agree with you, Anjiro. I think she's the one who's in charge. And also, if you look at the opposition and what the opposition has been saying, it's like they thought that she's weak. And so they were trying to exploit the perceived weakness by reinvigorating this whole conversation about Katiba, by bringing up all these things and saying, you're the one who chaired the Katiba conversation anyway, so let's talk about the Katiba. Katiba means something to those in power. Revising the Katiba, reviewing the constitution means something to those in power. It means that you're going to lose something. And coming so soon after you've taken office, and people are already starting to tell you now, by the way, now that you're in office, let's talk about how you're going to lose some of the power that you've now just inherited. Even I would arrest you first and tell you, you know what, just
Nyamaza.
stay there for a while. We'll discuss.
And maybe in terms of political astuteness, because we asked several political questions, and I think he must know the political scenario, but he didn't communicate it. Because by saying, who are these shadowy figures, who says that? If you're in the opposition, you do those computations. Talking about the East African region, again, he hasn't done the computation. So I think there's a narrative he's selling, and maybe a prudent approach would have been to approach Suluhu and talk about when do we restart the conversation after
You're assuming he hasn't.
Making assumptions.
He told us that his party leader wrote to the president. The president wrote back to the party leader, Freeman Mbowe, acknowledging that I have received. And the president said, in due course, we shall have a meeting.
So maybe they're, and not justifying political intimidation on any account, but when there are so many, the decks are stacked against you, maybe a prudent course would have been to try and open that line of communication.
As soon as possible.
Support her presidency, support her agenda to entrench herself by, trying to build that line of communication, maybe. But like I said, I don't know the situation on the ground. Maybe the reality of being, I'm thinking about the Moi days, which line of communication was there between Nyati House and State House. There was none. So, yeah.
So let's then shift the conversation to what we wanted to discuss this hour, which is something we've talked about many times. We have talked about citizen participation, public participation at every level in government. Civic education, the other day we were given a new term, political education of the voter to understand. So this is the person that you want to elect for. This is the position that you need to fill by going to the ballot. And then the expectations of that position. So that then you know how to judge the person that you've put in that position. And the question that we asked ourselves, and the CTU brought it out, is after casting the ballot, what do we do as voters? Do we cast the ballot and we sit back and say, now I expect results? Or do we cast the ballot and say, I expect results and I want to see, I'll be conducting continuous assessment, I'll be doing continuous reviews. Do we do that? What is the role of the citizen after an election? Joanne, that's a conversation that you want us to have this morning.
Yeah. So I asked a number of friends on WhatsApp, preempting this conversation yesterday, and momentarily there were crickets. Nobody knew the answer. And I think at the end of the evening, when I checked to see the 30 messages that I received answering that question, the sentiment that I felt was, one, people don't think that after they wake up early morning on election day at 5 a.m., queue and cast their vote, that they have any other responsibility thereafter. Somebody even said, oh, do I have any other responsibility other than, paying my taxes and almost like handing over this thing. Okay, you sold me your mission, your vision and everything. This is my money. Do as you please type of thing. But then the other thing is people viewed the election process as an event and not as a process or as a journey. So once you wake up in the morning and you cast your vote, it's almost as if done and dusted. We'll see you again in 5 years, and not necessarily as a start of a political citizen participation process that I want to engage in for the next 5 years. I felt that people didn't see that they have the information. People didn't see that they have the avenue to be able to engage in these things. I feel like, for instance, for me, it's only because I'm in a public policy class that I know that, if there's a bill that is in the House, that is in Parliament, for example, the relevant committee has then advertised for it, I can, as a citizen, give my views about that particular bill. Or I know that during the budgetary process, that because of our constitution, because of the Public Finance Management Act of 2012, that I can actually engage in the process. But there's a disconnect between what public participation is hyped up to be in the constitution versus what people see and understand, right? I live in an area where, the way they say, the car in front of you is a Toyota. I live in an area where, in addition to Toyotas, the other common vehicle is a blue Bowser, right? Water shortage is a thing. Like, if I don't get water from county council, I'm getting it from a Bowser. And majority of the time, actually 75% of the time, it's getting from, I don't know where they get their water from, that county council hasn't discovered. That's another conversation. But who do I go to? Who do I go to say, how am I paying 800 per trip for Bowser water every week?
Yep.
Right?
It's the same water that should be coming to you.
Exactly.
But it's being sold to you.
Exactly. And I feel like there have been moments in history that almost like gave us as Kenyans permission to participate, like as citizens. When we think about gaining independence in 1963, what were they saying? They were saying, we're tired. We're tired of subjugation. We're tired of our land, our resources being appropriated or misappropriated. We want to govern ourselves, In the late 80s and the early 90s, when we talk about multipartyism, there was also another cry for, it's great we got our independence, but what are we saying now? We're saying that we have divergent views. We have a diversity of opinion and thought and ideas. So why can't we have that reflected in our political ecosystem, right? And then now we have the 2010 Constitution that now almost like entrenched and deepened citizen participation. So we've had moments in history that have given us the leeway to speak, but I don't know if we know how to. And I
think we do. Just the examples you've given, people spoke and they got the result. They spoke, they fought, they got independence. They spoke, they pushed, they got multi-partyism, they got new constitution. It's maybe what happens after speaking and getting, then what?
But people speak. It's at what level and to what effect? Because I think the middle class, professional class in Kenya have largely opted out of public processes, apart from voting. So in terms of school, water, security, even roads, cabro work, you have bad road, garbage. So unfortunately, the middle class has made a calculation that it's cheaper to pay than to hold government to account. But the majority rely on public services. And at that point, people do engage. And much as these public participation processes do not work optimally, in fact, very suboptimally, people do engage. And I'll give you an example.
Exactly?
I'll give you an example. It was under Kidero because it became very difficult to engage under the Sonko administration in Nairobi County, even though there may have been more robust public participations taking place, but uptake anyway. Under Kidero, still fresh with a new election, this is a new devolved government, public participation was taking place around the budget. And they would hold the budget forums at the ward level. And they'd announce this in the paper with 1 or 2 days notice. Really rude. They assume you have nothing you're doing. They put it in the paper and the administrators will sensitize people. People showed up. And people, especially in the low-income areas, showed up. And they showed up the first year. They showed up the second year. By the third year, there were some 17 points of public participation where those government officers could not meet the public because people were enraged. They said, we told you what we wanted, you haven't done it, now you're back. We will not keep giving, our views. So people do engage. But now, after that kind of, with the problem with public participation, without a responsive government, the formal public participation process then becomes very challenging. A second way people engage is disruptively. When government doesn't give you organized channels, then you'll organize disruptively. For instance, you remember the strike by the taxi owners around the license fees and things like that. So people engage where they have this link with government. Those that don't have a link are unlikely to engage. Last point is back to the private, kind of professional middle class who are majority taxpayers, unfortunately. We pay the most tax and are most disengaged from government. That now, to my mind, is the response you're getting on your phone. And it doesn't make sense.
I think those are very interesting insights. The people that you say engage, for example, in the Kidero days when they'd advertise and give 48 hours notice for a meeting, how many people would turn up and what representation was there? Is it people who have had some political activity, maybe people who had vied for elective positions in the previous, people who are involved in political parties in the community, or was it just the ordinary person just turning up and sitting there and contributing?
We actually monitored. We sent monitors to attend forums in, I think, about 20 ward level discussions. And what we found is that, no, it's not political leaders. In fact, MCAs had tried to ambush the process in some places because there's been a big competition between the county government and MCAs. MCAs believe all public participation should go through them because this is their electorate.
It's their area.
These are their people. So no, it is not those political, whatever, it's normal people. The other thing is public participation is derided as, oh, those are the unemployed, blah, blah, blah. But no, you'll find really it's people who work. It's informal sector, the informal trade. It's a mix of people. Of course, there are maybe some layabouts who will be there, but they're also constituents, they have a right under public participation. So it is active people with active issues, and they're talking about water, they'll be talking about security. Yeah, so people engage, and I believe they possibly still continue to engage. It's just that we stop monitoring. So if you rely on government services, and the government is calling public participation meetings, people do engage. But there's a lack of the ability to influence is the problem.
And Wanjiru, you're dispelling a hypothesis that I previously held, because I thought that people who are eking a living and not making a living, eking a living where you're literally looking for your daily substance, like you can't afford to sit in a public participation forum because you're busy. You're trying to get the next hustle in a house washing clothes or a construction site or whatever it is. I, for some reason, thought that those are the people who would not engage in public participation processes, but it's us, people who make a living, who have the flexibility of income and time to be part of those processes.
That's the irony. And you talked about numbers. In the low income areas, and I'm trying to remember, you'd have up to 200 people showing up.
Wow.
In Kilimani, Kileleshwa, it's a different story.
Oh, they don't.
3, 4, 5.
So
is it because we don't see our vote? Because I feel like our vote is our bargaining chip. It's a thing that elevates us to a position of I demand, etc. Is it because that the middle class folks don't see their vote as something worthwhile? That they don't care for those processes?
I don't think it's that. Ask yourself the question, what will this elected leader actually do for me? What do I need from this person? Somebody who falls in that category of the middle class does not see, because they live in an area where they have a road, they have water, they have electricity. These things that are considered basic, if they need to go to hospital, they will go. As opposed to somebody whose every day is a challenge. Every single day. There's nothing like assuming and taking certain things for granted. That perspective simply does not exist. So, if somebody is an elected leader, they represent your hope. So, when there's something that they need to present to you, you will go and listen because it represents this hope that you think will be realized at some point. Which point you're not really certain of, but there is that hope. And when they're disappointed, and as Wanjiro put it very eloquently, when they then tell you, please don't come back here, they've hoped and hoped, and they've realized these hopes are never really going to come to fruition. So you and your ideas,
You're the problem.
go exactly where you came from. Go
Yeah.
back.
In fact, at that point, we decided to organize and set up a resident association in Kileleshwa where public participation was actually a handful of people, literally. The first meeting that I attended with some other very active lady, we are the ones who determined. We were like, no, where can these put these projects? But eventually a residents association was organized. And I remember in the formation of that, part of the discussion was we need to build alliances between this upmarket and the informal settlements within the ward, because the votes are in the lower
informal.
income. The MCA, possibly even the MP, is determined not by ourselves because this is a minority, but there are no linkages. We are apathetic, they are engaged, and they have the number of votes, and that's where the vote buying will take place. In fact, we tried several times to engage with our MCA.
Yep.
I mean, why bother?
Yeah, who
Why
are you
bother? Who are
anyway?
you? Who are you?
Your numbers are very few.
At the very outset in Kideros, whatever we managed on noise pollution, we had a meeting, a very interesting meeting, some good results. They didn't last for very long. But then, especially under Sonko's, we
So here's
even
the
did a
thing.
petition to the county assembly. No, because you can petition
Yeah.
your MCA.
Yeah.
Under the Public Participation Act of Nairobi County, 100 residents can get together, sign a petition, and your MCA has to come and meet you. And this is
How did that work?
statutory. It worked in Buruburu. They managed in Buruburu. We didn't manage in Kileleshwa,
So
and
does
then we
that
didn't
speak
follow
more
up.
for the public in Buruburu or the MCA?
It speaks for just under Sonko, things really became very difficult
It speaks of the attitude of government.
of government.
Which is the point
government
I
of the
want to
day.
raise here. What is clear is, number one, the majority of voters in Nairobi, for example, are in the low-income areas. And that's why even politicians will tell you, kura iko kwa ground. Ground, they don't mean Kileleshwa or Lavington. Ground, they mean the low-income areas. Majority of voters are there. Those voters engage with their leaders. They are the ones that, even the time we keep talking about this here, those are the ones who know their MCA one-on-one. Those in Kilimani, Kileleshwa, and other places do not know who their MCA is.
Or their ward or their
Or
ward.
they don't even
name.
know their. I know I vote in that primary school. Which ward is that? Which
Yes.
constituencies? They
Yeah,
don't
'cause
even know.
that's
a
true.
They just know they're in Nairobi and the school they voted. The other people know their ward, they know their constituency, they know their MP, they know their MCA, they know even the ward administrator.
Exactly.
They know the person. They engage. The other minority does not engage. Now, the issue though is, even with all this engagement, do they engage with full power or do they engage when they do not have power? In terms of, are they actually able to hold the leaders accountable? When you're having that meeting with the MCA and you're saying this is what we want, does the MCA shake, or does the MCA know, okay, you guys say, talk, then I'll stand and say, ni kweli kabisa, tutafanya. And then they go. And they know fully well that even if they don't deliver, they'll find other ways of doing it. Do they have actual power as they engage?
Wow. I think the one thing in the work we've done, the work we monitor, the one question that members of the public don't ask is, where did the money go? They don't ask those kind of questions. They ask for medicine, they ask for water, they talk about security. So when they are looking for their MCA, they are looking for issues that are affecting them really immediately and in an urgent, pressing manner. So MCAs will try and do what they can do. And what usually the MCA is able to do is to have conversations. They go to the county because you have an unresponsive government. Our problem is our governments are unresponsive. The other problem is there is not enough money. The other problem is a lot of that money is being eaten by cartels. So the MCA is able to now get into that and say, hey, si ufungulia hawa maji, nini, inafunguliwa. It might run for 4-5 months before the Bowsers or whatever. So they are able, and they will do things. There's also land reclamations. Some residents are very active. I know there was some youth group that was fighting with the chief, and they fought for almost 3 years until the case, I think, went up to the NLC. At some point, Amnesty may also have been notified because the chief was grabbing the land. He'd come and put his office there and was then, proceeding to do other actions to grab the land.
He was opening up kiosks and all.
Those kind of things. So there is response, but not sustained response. And sometimes it's very tokenistic.
Yeah.
We have a problem with our governance. And it, I think, starts with the leadership.
Having a conversation in the Situation Room on citizen public participation, the power of the citizen, and the responsibility of a voter after the elections. In the room with you is Eric Latif, C.T. Muga, Wanjiro Gekonyo, right? It's Wanjiro?
It's
not
Wanjiro.
Ndu.
Yeah, you got it right.
And
you're
Joanne.
making me work so hard. I need tea.
And Joanne, is it the same across the country, especially when you get out of the urban areas into the rural wards? Is it the same? Do people engage with government?
And do they engage from a position of power?
Which is important because, for example, I can tell you, you go to any part of this country today, attend, let's say, a funeral. Before anything starts, you'll be addressed by the MCA and the chief, which means that people know these are our leaders. Chief, representing national administration, MCA is present, or in some instances when the ward administrator is present, he's also engaging. Now, do people engage with them from a position of power, or are we going to request for services? Bona MCA, unajua tafadhali, unajua hapa kwetu, this and the other, and then the MCA, Mheshimiwa, decides whether they can escalate this matter or not.
The internalized power dynamics that we have with leadership is, I think, what we're discussing here. Joanne, there's something you wanted to mention about the middle class. Yes, you said it in whispers. Now say it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. I feel like, I could call myself middle class. And I feel like, what are the solutions for middle class folks to engage? We hear a lot of middle class are apathetic. They don't do this. And I say that as well, But do we, I don't know, like, is it that they just don't want to engage? And I think you articulated that there's probably no need to. But how can we push the needle on that conversation for engagement? Let me give an example of what I know happens in Rwanda. And I mean, not the perfect democratic system, has a lot of questions on whether it's truly
there a perfect democratic system.
None. But I think that there's been conversations on is it.
If people have a
is
voice,
exactly,
if
political
people have
liberties.
a voice, then it's a democratic
So
system.
there's something they call, and I'm going to butcher it, but there's something that they call umushikiriano, something like that. It's a Rwanda national dialogue. I studied it with a lot of interest because it's an annual session that's convened by the Office of the President. Every single year, he brings together Rwandans living in Rwanda and Rwandans living in the diaspora. They have a session that's a live session, but that's also broadcast like on Facebook Live or something like that. He actually sits alongside his equivalent of CSs and ministers and stuff like that. People say, you said you're going to do this, or your members, elected representatives, you didn't do this. He actually calls them out and says, you said these people have actually been fired as a result of that. And people are discussing that as a model for public participation, that we actually have citizen views and ideas and opinions articulated. We have the people who we have voted for, duty bearers being held into account and being asked, have you done so and so? And then if you haven't, you actually face the repercussions, right? So I think that's a system where the power dynamic, the response, the uptake is visible. I mean, yeah.
Interesting. I think there's China also has this, and I totally
China.
I'm using it in the
Democracy.
same breath, so
Yeah.
I didn't. Right, there's this conversation that's being put forward. I think Tanzania also did it, Magafuli, where he says, don't think about Western type democracy. There's different types of democracy and answerability. With Magafuli, of course, he was a total autocrat, but it was the issue that he was engaging with people and he was responsive to their needs on the ground. With China continually, this is their line. They say, do not impose Western style democracy. We have our own type of democracy where decisions are made by the political party, where at the local level,
So
the
is it a
citizens,
top-down approach or is it a bottom-up?
at the local level, citizens have quite a lot of say in terms of holding the administration to account. So there are questions about what's the model. But Kenya also has models that are actually built on democratic and civic space. We had the thing called LASDAP, which was under the local authorities. It was brought in during the reforms of the local authorities under the structural adjustment program, but it came in to support the local authorities. The LASDAP was similar to what you've mentioned, where for the local authority budget to be passed, they had to have the citizen plan and they had to have a consensus meeting during which those representatives of all those projects came and said, yes, that is what we agreed to.
Yeah.
If that didn't happen, the local authority could not pass its budget. So the point is we have public participation, but it has no teeth. And I think we do need to rethink what we call public participation, not try to mirror too much the Western democracy, but we must not compromise civic liberties.
To infuse teeth. I think if you look at how we have engaged with government, at a local level as communities, we know how to engage amongst ourselves. People meet in chamas, people meet in church groups, people meet in whatever, and they hold each other accountable. But when government comes in, it takes a different name. It's called a baraza. Public baraza is government telling the people. It's not government engaging with the people. And in our mind, maybe, public participation, whenever we are meeting with the government, it's always we sit here, government tell us, and then we're like, okay, now we know, we go home.
And we ask for favors.
Yes. And now we use that opportunity to bargain here and there.
Kazi ya nani who.
Eric, I've just thought of a way that the middle class engage. Twitter. And I don't think we should discount it, right? I think KOT is a powerful tool that has been... Recently, Babu Owino was trending. And I think Kenyans on Twitter said that we're going to remind Babu Owino every single time about DJ Evolve. So whenever Babu Owino trends, you'll see just somewhere there, you'll see DJ Evolve. It was the whole thing about, his account or fake account or whatever being verified, right? And I feel like that's a place where we've seen, even in the West, whether it's hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag Me Too or whatever, we've actually seen a digital revolution where citizens are using the digital space to speak. So perhaps the middle class are participating,
We have a
but
platform.
we've got a platform. We've got a platform. So we just need to figure out, somebody needs to do some research.
The thing is, we don't
do
connect.
hashtags then become policy?
We don't connect. You see that whole thing that we started by saying that we got to a point in this country, especially all of us in the country, we know there's government and there's government which is incapable of sorting me out, and therefore I sort myself out, come up with alternatives. I will work hard to take my child to private school. I will work hard to get insurance that I can go to private hospitals. I will work hard so that I can move to a place where I can pay a watchman so that I get security. I will work hard to go to an estate where we can contribute and do our cabro and our own internal estate roads. I will work hard to move all those things. We basically look at how am I going to do the government's job for myself. Now, we don't connect that as failure of government. We look at it as success and progress. So when I'm sitting there and I can count back, I've got good medical insurance, and my child is going to a very good school, I drive this good car, I live in this estate where we have, in fact, we have 3 gates. There's the outer barrier, and then there's a gate, and then in my house there's a gate. And we look at that as success and not connecting it with, it's actually failure of a government that you are paying tax to. So when you have all these platforms, we complain. We remind DJ Nani about DJ Evolve. We remind Uhuru. We say, you guys, remember how you voted as a community? Oh, this is now what the fruits of your labor. We remind IMF, don't give the government money, but we do not talk about our local road. We don't talk about our local garbage. The fact that I spend so much money on all these services that I'm also paying taxes for. I pay money for garbage. I pay money for security. I pay money for transport. All these things.
But I don't think you're right, but maybe this is more layered and is not that absolute in that citizens are engaging. And I do agree that Twitter, possibly like your proverb, there are new forms of public participation emerging so that we have to get out of the idea that it will always be government sits there and we sit here. KOT is a very valid platform for citizens to express themselves on various
But when
issues.
let's go
That's
back to the relationship,
public-
the power dynamics we have as Kenyans and citizens with leadership.
You've decided I can't finish my point. Go ahead.
No, I'm just doing a Wanjiru on you.
Hey, you're being rude. Since you haven't spoken so much, endelea, but I had a point.
No, please continue with your point.
Let me just, and I'll be quick.
Yes.
There's different forms of public participation, and we possibly need to recognize that people will engage in a manner that is suitable to them, a manner they feel speaks to them. But then on the other hand, when Eric was speaking and talking about Kenyans opting out, they do push back. So it's not, there's some work happening. What I was going to say, our glass is maybe a quarter of the way full. And in the democratization process, we are moving from centralized authoritarian government to active, engaged, responsive government. So we are somewhere along the way. So the question maybe that we need to ask is, what are the gains and what are the opportunities? And we've had reversals with an administration that has come in that is then, like my last point, like Priscilla said yesterday, she said leadership is elite. And there's a whole reason why she said that in her training, And I just thought that is so inimical to the thinking of the Constitution and to the thinking of bottom-up accountability. So we're on a democratic journey. We have reversals with a government that believes leadership is elite. But we are at 35%. And the question is, what are the lessons that we can use to forge on? Sorry, I promised it would be short. It didn't come out that short, but there you go.
You see, so long as it's not, this is a Kenyan issue. I could broadly say it's a human issue, but I'm not going there. Kenyan issue. The way we respond to people in authority, people in positions of authority, people in political power, it is a mental thing that we have. Holding them to account has very little to do with telling them, excuse me, sir, you have failed here and here and here. Or, excuse me, madam, you should have done this and this and this. You said it. It is looking for an opportunity where you can butter them so that you can make your request. Now, the issue of holding leaders to account, one could also argue, I could argue, probably we don't know. How do we go about it? How do we even tell leadership? I'll give an example. I was at the funeral of a friend of mine, and this is somebody I've known since 1972 when I was in Form 1. And in that crowd, there are people who, there are people who had gone to primary school boarding with him. So there are people who had known him for, God, my goodness, over 50 years. But the people who were allowed to speak, and were told it was the family, he was a lawyer, members of the Law Society, and one person who was in the law class with him. Now, in my heart, I wanted to stand up and tell the preacher, excuse me, these people don't know this person. We are the ones who actually know this person.
We are the ones who saw him mature.
We've known this person literally all our lives. So surely our representative ought to be able to say something, even if it's for 2 minutes. But because it is a church, and because it is a preacher saying it, I kept quiet. I cursed myself. I should actually have walked up to that particular individual and told him, Reverend, just listen very carefully. And started off with, young man, listen, okay? You do not know this person, we do. So please, we're asking for 3 minutes. It really, unless the family feels very strongly about it, 3 minutes will not really kill it. That's what I ought to have done. And I looked at my experience and I said, this is what got me thinking about it. I said, when it comes to even leadership, it is almost considered a sin. It's almost considered something harmful and negative. If you point out and say, excuse me, Mheshimiwa, you are absolutely wrong on that particular point. People ask, what are you saying? How dare you speak to that person?
You're disrespecting the leader.
And yet we forget that this is your servant. This is somebody you elected to work for you. And it goes right up to the president. So yes, there's respect for the position, but it isn't reciprocated. And because it isn't reciprocated, the calling out is something we don't know. We don't encourage. And our society actually frowns upon.
Culture. We don't have a culture.
Yes. And I thought that with the youthful generation, it might change. It hasn't.
So we don't have a culture of questioning leadership
No, we don't.
and power.
We don't.
It's
we
national
don't.
It's like elder.
We suck up to it. We don't question it.
Because we know the
we're
repercussions.
conditioned.
We know the repercussions. If you go, I mean, I consider myself an activist, and I've gone to the street several times, and I know what's going to happen if I'm found by cops on the street, right? So I know that if I question leadership, the repercussions that will follow me will be grave.
Be a clampdown.
But then there are Kenyans who understood that repercussions. This discussion we're having is as a result of people who decided, yes, we know the repercussions,
But
but
we'll
damn
still
it, we are going to do what we need to do, and we're going to say what we want to say. That is why we're where we are. And we seem to have forgotten that it needs to be done. It's not, democracy is it's not static. It's something that has to be actively and continuously pursued. The media understands this because when this government first came into power, one of the first things they tried to do was muzzle the media, muzzle the press. They tried very, very hard. But this particular fault is we fought back. Democracy is not something you sit and just be comfortable with. You have to keep fighting for it. Look at the US, the citadel of democracy. They have realized they were almost losing it.
Yeah.
Who would have expected that you would have a president in the US who, in many ways, I used to smile and say, man, this guy is so much like us. Honestly.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, they thought this democracy, because they have it and they keep telling themselves they are the perfect human example for democracy, it's okay. It isn't. It never is. Because human nature is not really democratic. That is the whole point. So it's something you have to keep fighting for.
Right.
Fight for and engage. Sorry, Angela.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And for us, you bring in the issue of our education system, or oral and formal. You know, a lot of the younger generation don't know the truth about the colonial struggle, about even the multi-party struggle. So a lot of Kenyans are very disconnected from the democratic journey. And so how do you become active in defending something you don't know?
Yeah.
So that's the starting point. That's the starting point. So we are conditioned to be very subservient to authority, whether it's in the church or whether it's in school. This is a conditioning. And to get out of this, we have to,
We've got to uncondition ourselves. Yeah. So we've gotten to a point where I keep going back to that point where we are here and government is this thing. And we have disconnected ourselves. There are things that we do, and you said it very well very many moons ago, Wajiro, that we Kenyans, we live despite the government. We find our own way. And when we want to engage with the government, is we send somebody to go and grab something from that government and bring it to us. So when we are engaging with government, we are looking at ways in which we can smoothen our ways into that government to go and grab something and come out, and not say that we actually are the ones who make this government thing work. Yeah. What are the gains and what are the opportunities, like you'd asked? I think the gains, like you've said, is unlike in the past when platform was owned by government, when that gathering would be controlled by government by saying we are calling a public baraza on a certain day where the chief will come and address you, we now have own platforms like social media. We are living the information age where we know what's happening across the country as soon as it happens. Unlike before, when we only expected it to come from the one channel that's owned by government. Now we have all those things. The opportunities would only be realized once we realize the power that we have as citizens. And that is by stopping to disconnect ourselves from government. By looking at the things that we, on a daily basis, if on a daily basis I'm living here and I'm finding traffic, and I know that there's an agency called Kenha that has contracted somebody to come and build this road, and I see that this is a perennial problem, I have to connect it to Kenha and the work that Kenha should have done to make sure that as this contractor is working, they have managed traffic. If we don't do that, if we say, sasa tutapitia wapi? Tupitie huko ndani, nitafute njia, nitokee huko. If I don't connect and start demanding then of Kenha, nothing will happen.
Eric,
I'll just be sitting back.
Do we really have the power
to connect?
Yes, we do.
Do we really have the? How do we harness that? How do we identify that we have the power? I know my generation, millennials, are hopeless. It's for real. It feels like a hopeless situation. Why do you think many people are going to Canada, for example? It's almost as if figure out your hustle. It's become a very individualistic kind of thing. Even trying to get people to organize, even organizing people for a protest or something like that from because I worked in an NGO that did that a lot, is difficult. I remember one incident trying to get young people and middle class folk to understand the issue of police brutality and extrajudicial executions. It took us a really long time campaign wise to try and figure that out until George Floyd was murdered in the States. And then all of a sudden people are doing Blackout Tuesday on their platforms and understanding the police citizen dynamic. So I feel like one, there's a disconnect. Two, people are hopeless. It almost feels as if, what do you do?
When you say you are trying to explain it to the middle class,
Yeah.
who are you using to craft the messages that you would use to actually explain this?
Even victims of EJEs, of extrajudicial execution. So I'm coming to you and I'm saying, I'm a mother, I live in Madare. My son was gunned down yesterday by police officers. I'm trying to, I'm humanizing the story. I'm telling you that. And they're like, really? That happens in Kenya?
So bad.
What? You know?
It is so
and
bad.
because it predominantly happens in low income settlement areas. So we're talking about Kariobangi, Dandora, Kibera, etc. And so you in your cushy space, you can't fathom it as an
Associated with
issue.
crime
Connected.
Exactly. Yeah, he must have done
Them.
something. Or poverty, how we criminalize poverty. So he must have done something wrong.
But you know that particular attitude that you call it the millennials, there's a false note to it. We don't even have an entrenched middle class in this country. We think we do, we don't. Because our middle class, for the longest time, were people who were employed by government officers, whether it was local authority. You fitted into that. And where you stayed, usually you stayed because the government gave you the house. Okay? Now, their children went to, and I'm speaking about myself here, of course, went to schools that were government schools. And government schools were the best schools then.
Yep.
So, and with the time, you continued ad infinitum. What am I saying? Why am I calling it false? Even millennials can trace, without too much difficulties, a time when your forebear was a peasant. It's not far. You can just, you don't even have to go really, it's not like 100 years.
There are photos.
You just do a few
stories.
and peasant. Okay? So there is this fight that very many Kenyans have, especially in the middle class, to try and escape that particular background. Unfortunately, by trying to escape it, you're entrenching it. You're telling us you're escaping it. And it is a reality that actually you should be proud of, because it shows the steps you have taken to get to where you are.
It's a very short hour, this one. Can you imagine? It's over.
Imeisha.
Yeah. Joanne, come back again soon.
Yeah, talk
Yes.
about gender or human rights. I'll be back.
Most certainly.
Kabisa. Thank you very much, Siti.
If the elders leave you with a legacy of a dignified language, you do not abandon it and speak a childish language.
Okay. Now, Joanne, translate that in your own way as you understand it, as you say goodbye.
Don't forsake your heritage and your anchor and what makes you for something foreign.
Be true to yourself.
Yep.
Okay. That's a good one. Wanjiru, what's yours?
It's been a good week. Thank you for the proverbs and the robust conversation. Keep on keeping on.
There was a song.
There was.
Keep on keeping on.
Oh, we can end with a song. We started with a song.
Thank you very much for tuning into the Situation Room today. Join us again next week, Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Yes, that was Wanjiro Gikonyo, who's been with us since Wednesday, and that was Joanne, who's been with us since 8 o'clock, and then that is Siti Muga, who's always here with you, and Eric Latif, who's glued to the chair. Have a lovely weekend, folks. The Olympics opening ceremony is taking place this afternoon. Enjoy that, and let's wish all the best to Team Kenya.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.